She mocked the human janitor until her mother ordered, "Bow before him." Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The grand halls of the Galactic Diplomatic Station Vega Prime gleamed with polished surfaces and advanced technology, where a young Centaurian princess named Lyra Vex sneered at the sight of a simple human cleaning spilled drinks from the floor. Commander Jacob Carter wiped the sweat from his brow as he finished mopping the spilled tritium wine from the polished obsidian floor of the Grand Diplomatic Hall. He checked his watch, 2,300 hours. Another 3 hours until his shift ended, and he could finally get some much-needed sleep. The past week had been exhausting, with the Galactic Summit bringing in dignitaries from 17 different star systems, each with their own particular needs, and the messes that followed. "I cannot believe they still use actual humans for that," a haughty voice said in deliberately loud universal standard, the lingua franca of the known galaxy. "It's so primitive." Jacob didn't look up. He had been hearing comments like that for the 3 years he'd worked on Vega Prime. After 15 years in Earth Special Forces and another 5 as a Black Ops specialist, he had learned to let insults slide off him like water off a duck's back. Besides, his current position gave him exactly what he needed: access, anonymity, and time to observe. "Lyra, that's enough," another voice said, softer but with undeniable authority. Jacob risked a glance. Standing near the entrance to the banquet hall were 2 Centaurians. A younger female with iridescent blue skin that shimmered with bioluminescent patterns when she moved, and an older, taller female whose skin had deepened to an almost royal purple with age. The younger one, Lyra, apparently, wore the ornate ceremonial armor of the Centaurian Royal Guard, while the elder was draped in flowing robes that marked her as someone of significant diplomatic importance. Lyra wasn't finished. "But mother, look at him. Using a stick with rags to clean the floor instead of proper decontamination tech. The humans are barely a century into space travel, and they still think mechanical solutions are adequate for everything. It's embarrassing that the Galactic Union even allowed them observer status." Jacob kept his head down and continued working, moving the mop methodically across the floor. Information was currency in his line of work, and these 2 weren't bothering to keep their voices down. "The humans have proven themselves adaptable and resourceful," the elder Centaurian replied. "Do not mistake simplicity for weakness, daughter. That is a lesson many have learned too late." Lyra made a dismissive sound. "Adaptable? They haven't even developed basic telepathic abilities or proper genetic modification protocols. Their fastest ships still take months to cross their own solar system. What could they possibly offer the Galactic Union?" The elder Centaurian, who Jacob now suspected was Ambassador Thela Vex, the head of the Centaurian Diplomatic Corps, simply sighed. "We will discuss this later. We have the reception with the Arcturian delegation in 20 minutes, and you need to change your attitude before we arrive." Jacob watched them leave from the corner of his eye, filing away the information for later. The Centaurians were one of the more powerful members of the Galactic Union, and their attitude toward Earth could have significant implications for humanity's standing in galactic politics. He finished cleaning the spill and moved on to his next task, polishing the massive crystal chandeliers that hung from the ceiling. As he adjusted the anti-gravity harness that would allow him to float up to the fixtures, his comm unit buzzed in his ear. "Eagle, this is Nest. Check-in time." Jacob tapped the nearly invisible device in his ear twice to activate it. "Nest, this is Eagle. Nothing significant to report. Regular maintenance duties continuing as scheduled. Any information on the closed session scheduled for tomorrow?" Jacob tapped the comm unit 3 times to indicate a negative. "No details yet. We'll continue observation and report if anything changes." "Understood. Regular check-in at 0300. Nest out." The comm went silent, and Jacob adjusted his harness, rising slowly toward the massive crystal structures above. As he floated upward, he mentally reviewed what he knew about tomorrow's closed session. The Galactic Union Security Council was meeting to discuss something so sensitive that even the agenda had been classified. Earth, as a mere observer state, had not been invited, but Director Chin at Earth Intelligence had made it clear that finding out what was happening in that meeting was Jacob's top priority. For 3 years, Jacob had maintained his cover as a maintenance worker on Vega Prime. The station staff had long ago stopped seeing him as anything but part of the background, which was exactly what made him so effective at his real job, gathering intelligence for Earth. He began carefully cleaning the crystal facets of the chandelier, his movements deliberate and practiced. The crystalline structures weren't merely decorative. They contained sophisticated surveillance tech that monitored everything from ambient temperature to conversation fragments. Jacob had discovered early on that while cleaning them, he could temporarily disrupt their function without triggering alarms, creating small windows of opportunity to place his own monitoring devices or extract data from the station's systems. As he worked, he reflected on Lyra's dismissive attitude toward humans. It wasn't uncommon among the younger members of the established galactic species. Earth had only made first contact 20 years ago, when a Rigelian scout ship had crash-landed in the Pacific Ocean. The discovery that humanity wasn't alone in the universe had initially caused panic, then wonder, and finally determination as Earth's nations unified in unprecedented ways to prepare for their place among the stars. But to species like the Centaurians, who had been traveling the cosmos for thousands of years, humans were newcomers, barely out of their planetary cradle. Jacob didn't take the condescension personally. It was valuable intelligence about how potential adversaries might underestimate Earth's capabilities, a misconception that could prove useful if tensions ever escalated beyond diplomacy. He had just finished with the last chandelier when his enhanced hearing picked up voices from the corridor outside. He quickly descended to the floor and resumed his mundane cleaning duties as the door slid open. "I assure you, High Chancellor, Earth's involvement would only complicate matters," said a deep, gravelly voice that Jacob recognized as belonging to Drex Mal, the Orion Confederation's security minister. "Perhaps," replied another voice, smooth and measured, likely High Chancellor Orin of the Galactic Security Council. "But their proximity to the affected sector makes them a factor we cannot ignore, regardless of their technological limitations." Jacob kept his eyes on his work, but his mind was racing. The affected sector? Were they talking about the recent disturbances in the Tau Ceti system, just 12 light-years from Earth? There had been rumors of unexplained ship disappearances and strange energy signatures, but official channels had been suspiciously quiet about the matter. "The humans don't need to know," Drex insisted. "Their observer status doesn't grant them access to Security Council matters, especially those involving the emergence protocols." Jacob nearly dropped his cleaning tool. The emergence protocols were mentioned only in whispers, even among the highest levels of Earth intelligence. They were supposedly contingency measures for dealing with existential threats to the Galactic Union, threats so severe that they warranted extraordinary measures. "We will discuss this further in the closed session," the High Chancellor said firmly. "For now, let us enjoy the reception. I understand the Antarian delegation has brought some of their famous luminescent wine." The two officials moved deeper into the hall, away from Jacob. He resumed his cleaning, mind working furiously to process what he had just heard. Earth needed to know about this, especially if something potentially dangerous was happening so close to the solar system. Jacob checked his watch again. 0100 hours. He had 2 hours before his next check-in with Nest. That gave him time to complete his scheduled duties and possibly find a way to get more information about tomorrow's closed session. He finished cleaning the hall methodically, ensuring that nothing in his behavior would arouse suspicion. As a maintenance worker, he was practically invisible to most of the station's diplomatic residents, but station security was another matter. The Vega Prime security forces were primarily staffed by Rigelians, whose compound eyes could detect minute changes in behavior patterns, a telltale sign of someone with ulterior motives. After completing his assigned tasks in the diplomatic hall, Jacob moved on to his next scheduled location, the central atrium, where the botanical specimens from dozens of worlds created a lush garden environment popular for informal meetings. As he tended to the Earth section, primarily maintaining the small patch of grass and trees from his home planet, he kept his ears open for any useful information. The atrium was quieter at this hour, with only a few late-night conversations happening in secluded corners. Jacob worked his way methodically through the Earth exhibits, eventually reaching a Japanese maple tree positioned near a secluded bench favored by the Arcturian ambassador and her aides. Sure enough, Ambassador Lorna sat there, her translucent skin glowing softly in the dim light, engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation with her chief security officer. "The intelligence is verified?" she asked in a hushed tone. "Triple-checked," the security officer confirmed. "The anomaly in Tau Ceti is growing. 3 more ships disappeared yesterday." Jacob carefully pruned the maple, maintaining his disinterested facade, while his enhanced hearing captured every word. "And the council believes it's connected to the ancient records?" Ambassador Lorna sounded troubled. "The energy signatures match the descriptions in the Founder archives. High Chancellor Oren has already authorized the deployment of the Observer Fleet to establish a quarantine perimeter." Jacob nearly cut through a branch he was supposed to be merely trimming. The Observer Fleet was the Galactic Union's most advanced military force, equipped with technology that made Earth's best warships look like wooden sailing vessels in comparison. If they were establishing a quarantine around a system so close to Earth, what about the humans? Ambassador Lorna asked, echoing Jacob's concerns. "Their homeworld is dangerously close if the anomaly expands as predicted. That's one of the topics for tomorrow's closed session," the security officer replied. "There are those who believe we should evacuate them, at least their leadership and a genetic sampling. Others think we shouldn't interfere with their natural development, regardless of the consequences." Jacob felt a cold knot form in his stomach. They were discussing potential extinction-level events, as if debating menu options. "And what does the High Chancellor believe?" "He hasn't stated his position publicly, but I've heard he favors limited intervention, enough to give the humans a fighting chance, but not enough to violate the non-interference protocols for emerging species." The conversation shifted to other matters, and Jacob continued his work, processing what he'd learned. Whatever was happening in Tau Ceti, it was serious enough that the Galactic Union was considering breaking its own strict non-interference rules regarding Earth. He needed to get this information back to Earth immediately, not wait for his scheduled check-in. But direct communications from Vega Prime were monitored, and using his emergency protocols would blow his cover, something Director Chen had explicitly ordered him not to do except in the most dire circumstances. Jacob finished his work in the atrium and headed toward the maintenance corridors that ran like veins throughout the station. These utilitarian passages were his domain, largely ignored by the diplomatic staff and only sporadically patrolled by security. He made his way to a junction near the central computing hub, where he had previously installed a small, undetectable data tap into the station's communication systems. He knelt down, ostensibly to check a ventilation grill, and quickly extracted a microdata chip from a hidden compartment in his tool belt. The chip contained a highly compressed message detailing what he had learned, encrypted with quantum algorithms that even the advanced Galactic Union systems would take years to crack. He was about to insert it into his data tap when he heard footsteps approaching from around the corner. Jacob smoothly transitioned to actually fixing the ventilation grill, tucking the data chip back into its hiding place in one fluid motion. A moment later, 2 Rigelian security officers turned the corner, their compound eyes scanning the corridor with mechanical efficiency. "Maintenance," Jacob said with a nod, gesturing to the grill. "Getting some strange readings from the environmental controls in this section." The lead Rigelian regarded him for a moment, faceted eyes unreadable. "Identification," he demanded. Jacob pulled out his station ID badge, which identified him as Jacob Carter, human, maintenance level 3, and held it up for inspection. The Rigelian scanned it with a handheld device, which beeped in confirmation. "You are outside your scheduled maintenance zone," the Rigelian noted, mandibles clicking. "Environmental control redirected me," Jacob explained, the lie flowing easily. "Said the diplomat quarters were complaining about temperature fluctuations. I'm just tracing the problem through the system." The Rigelian stared at him for a long moment, compound eyes unblinking. Jacob maintained his relaxed posture, projecting the slight weariness of a man in the middle of a long night shift. Finally, the Rigelian nodded. "Proceed. But log the reassignment properly next time." "Will do. Sorry about that," Jacob replied with just the right amount of deference expected from a low-level maintenance worker. The security officers continued their patrol, and Jacob returned to the ventilation grill, actually fixing the minor issues he found to maintain his cover. He would have to find another opportunity to send his message. 3 hours later, Jacob's shift was finally ending. He had managed to place his data chip in the communication tab during a brief window when the security patrols were distracted by a minor disturbance in the diplomatic quarters, something about an Aldebaranian diplomat's pet escaping its containment field. As he made his way back to the maintenance staff quarters, he passed through the central concourse, which was beginning to stir with early morning activity. Diplomatic aides hurried to prepare for the day's meetings. Vendors set up their small shops selling exotic goods from across the galaxy, and security personnel took up their positions with methodical precision. And there, standing near the entrance to the primary conference center, was Lyra Vex, the Centaurian princess who had mocked him the night before. She was engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with a tall, slender alien species Jacob recognized as a Talaxian, known for their extensive trading networks and, more concerning, their willingness to sell information to the highest bidder. Jacob slowed his pace, adjusting his path to take him within earshot while appearing to be simply heading toward the staff quarters. "The information must be accurate," Lyra was saying, her voice low but intense. "My mother would never agree to meet with you if—" The Talaxian raised a six-fingered hand. "Princess Vex, my information is always accurate. The human delegation has been gathering intelligence on your mother's activities for months. They suspect her of negotiating separately with the Draconis hegemony." Jacob kept his face impassive, but internally he was processing this new information. Earth had indeed been monitoring Ambassador Vex's communications, but not because of any suspected dealings with the Draconis hegemony, a militant collective that existed at the fringes of known space. Rather, Earth intelligence believed she was one of the few voices in the Galactic Union advocating for greater human involvement in galactic affairs. If someone was feeding Lyra false information about Earth's intelligence operations, it could undermine a potential ally. "That makes no sense," Lyra replied, her bioluminescent patterns shifting with what Jacob had learned to recognize as confusion. "My mother has always advocated for diplomatic solutions. The Draconis hegemony represents everything she opposes." "Perhaps," the Talaxian said with a shrug that rippled through his elongated frame. "Or perhaps she recognizes that the political landscape is changing. The anomaly in Tau Ceti has many reconsidering their alliances." Jacob had heard enough. This was significant. Someone was actively attempting to drive a wedge between Earth and one of its few potential advocates in the Galactic Union, and they were using the mysterious situation in Tau Ceti as leverage. He continued past them, maintaining his tired, end-of-shift demeanor, and made his way to the staff quarters. Once inside his small, utilitarian room, he performed his standard security sweep for surveillance devices, a habit that had saved his life more than once during his Special Forces days. Finding nothing new, he sat on his narrow bed and considered his options. His data chip was in place and would transmit its encrypted contents during the next scheduled communication window with Earth, about 6 hours from now. But this new information about potential disinformation targeting Ambassador Vex needed to be included. Jacob removed his boots and lay back on his bed, appearing to any casual observer to be a tired worker getting some well-deserved rest. In reality, he was activating a subdermal communication implant located behind his ear, technology that Earth officially didn't possess, reverse-engineered from salvaged alien tech and strictly classified. The implant allowed him to compose a message mentally, which would be encoded in his neural patterns and transmitted during his next REM sleep cycle, piggybacking on the station's regular data transmissions in a way that was virtually undetectable. It was reserved for only the most urgent communications, as each transmission slightly increased the risk of detection. This qualified. Jacob composed his message, detailing both what he'd overheard about the Tau Ceti anomaly and the apparent attempt to sabotage Earth's relationship with Ambassador Vex. With the message prepared, he allowed himself to actually rest. The implant would do its work while he slept, and he needed to be alert for what promised to be a crucial day. He awoke 4 hours later to the soft chime of his room's notification system. Blinking sleep from his eyes, he checked the message on his room's simple terminal. Maintenance alert. Diplomatic Sector D, 7 environmental systems malfunction. Level 3 technicians requested immediately. Jacob frowned. Sector D7 was where the Security Council's closed session was scheduled to take place in just 2 hours. An environmental systems malfunction now seemed suspiciously convenient, or it represented an opportunity. He dressed quickly in his maintenance uniform, gathered his tools, and headed out. As he walked through the corridors toward Diplomatic Sector D7, he mentally reviewed the layout of that section. If memory served, there was an access panel in the ceiling above the conference room that allowed maintenance workers to reach the environmental control systems. It would also provide an excellent vantage point for observing the closed session. When he arrived at Sector D7, he found 2 other maintenance workers already there, a Bellatraxian with 4 arms that made them particularly adept at repair work, and a fellow human named Rodriguez who had been on the station almost as long as Jacob. "Carter," Rodriguez greeted him with a nod. "They called you in too, huh? Must be serious." "What's the situation?" Jacob asked, slipping into work mode. "Temperature regulators are going haywire," the Bellatraxian explained, their multiple arms gesturing at a diagnostic panel. "One minute it's freezing, the next it's hot enough to make a Venusian sweat. And the council session starts in less than 2 hours." Jacob examined the diagnostic panel. The readings were indeed erratic, showing wild fluctuations in the environmental systems. But something didn't look right. The pattern of failures seemed too systematic. "I'll check the primary regulators in the ceiling access," Jacob volunteered. "Rodriguez, can you monitor the system diagnostics from here? Let me know if anything changes while I'm up there." Rodriguez nodded, and Jacob gathered the tools he'd need. The Bellatraxian continued working on the backup systems, their 4 arms moving in coordinated efficiency. Jacob used a maintenance ladder to reach the ceiling access panel, then pulled himself up into the narrow space above the conference room. As he had suspected, the environmental systems here were more sophisticated than in other parts of the station, likely incorporating additional security and monitoring features appropriate for high-level diplomatic meetings. He began a systematic diagnostic of the temperature regulation systems, and it didn't take long to find the problem. Someone had inserted a small device into the primary control node, a device that wasn't part of the original design. It was sending randomized commands to the temperature regulators, causing the fluctuations. Jacob recognized the technology immediately. It was a disruption device commonly used by the Orion Confederation's intelligence services, the same faction that Drexmau, the security minister who had been dismissive of Earth's involvement, represented. Interesting. Someone wanted to delay or relocate the Security Council meeting. The question was why. Jacob carefully removed the device, pocketing it for later analysis. He then made the necessary adjustments to restore the environmental systems to their proper function. But before closing up the access panel, he took the opportunity to place one of his own devices, a passive audio recorder that would capture the upcoming meeting. It was a risk, certainly. If discovered, it would blow his cover and potentially create a diplomatic incident. But given what he had overheard about the Tau Ceti anomaly and its potential threat to Earth, he deemed it a necessary one. He descended from the ceiling access and reported to Rodriguez and the Bellatraxian. "Found the problem," he said, holding up a burned-out regulator component, a decoy he had brought with him for just such occasions. Faulty regulator was sending mixed signals to the system. "I've replaced it, and the diagnostics should stabilize within the next few minutes." Sure enough, the environmental control panel began showing normal readings. The Bellatraxians' 4 arms performed a gesture that Jacob recognized as their species' equivalent of applause. "Efficient work, human," they said. "The diplomatic staff will be pleased." "Just doing my job," Jacob replied modestly. "I'll finish up the calibration if you two want to move on to your next assignments." Once alone, Jacob completed the legitimate work on the environmental systems, then did one final check to ensure his recording device was properly concealed and functioning. Satisfied, he packed up his tools and left Sector D7, nodding to the security personnel who were beginning to take up positions for the upcoming meeting. His shift wouldn't officially start for another 4 hours, which gave him time to return to his quarters, analyze the disruption device he had recovered, and prepare for whatever information his recording device might capture from the closed session. As he made his way back through the station's corridors, he spotted Ambassador Vex walking with her daughter Lyra. both now dressed in formal Centaurian diplomatic attire. They were headed in the direction of the main dining hall, likely for the morning meal before the day's sessions began. Jacob adjusted his path to take him past them, curious if he might overhear anything useful. As he approached, he kept his eyes down, playing the part of the deferential maintenance worker. "Mother, I still think you should reconsider your position on the human question," Lyra was saying, her voice carrying a note of frustration. "The information I received was provided by a Talaxian information broker with known ties to the Draconis hegemony." Ambassador Vex interrupted firmly. "Do you really believe such a source would provide unbiased intelligence?" Jacob continued past them, careful not to show any reaction. "But even if the specific details are questionable, the broader point remains," Lyra insisted. "Earth is too volatile, too unpredictable to be granted greater access to Galactic Union affairs. Their history is filled with conflict. They nearly destroyed themselves multiple times before achieving space travel." Ambassador Vex sighed, a sound that translated across species as parental exasperation. "And which of our species can claim a peaceful ascension to the stars? The Centaurian unification wars lasted for centuries. The Rigelian purges nearly wiped out 3 subspecies. Even the Arcturians, for all their current philosophical pacifism, once deployed planet-killer weapons against their own colonies." They turned a corner, their voices fading, but Jacob had heard enough to confirm his earlier assessment. Ambassador Vex was indeed sympathetic to Earth's position, while external forces, likely connected to the Draconis hegemony, were attempting to influence her daughter to undermine that support. He continued to his quarters, his mind working through the implications. The Draconis hegemony had long been considered a fringe threat, powerful but isolated. If they were now taking an active interest in Galactic Union politics, specifically around Earth and the Tau Ceti situation, that suggested a significant shift in their strategic thinking. Back in his room, Jacob examined the disruption device he had recovered from the environmental systems. It was sophisticated but not untraceable. In fact, it seemed almost deliberately obvious in its Orion design characteristics. That suggested a false flag operation, someone wanting to implicate the Orion Confederation in the disruption. He carefully disassembled the device, examining its components. Deep within its circuitry, he found what he was looking for, a micromanufacturing signature that identified its true origin. Not Orion at all, but Draconis. The plot thickened. Jacob reassembled the device and hid it in a secure compartment beneath his mattress. It was evidence that might prove useful later, but for now, his priority was the information from the closed Security Council session. He checked the time. The meeting would be starting soon, and his recording device would capture everything said within that room. All he could do now was wait for his shift to begin and hope that the risk he had taken would provide the crucial information Earth needed. For hours later, Jacob began his regular maintenance shift, starting in the residential sectors of the station. As he worked, his mind remained focused on the Security Council meeting that was now underway. His recording device would be capturing everything, but he wouldn't be able to retrieve the data until after the meeting concluded and security in the area relaxed. He was cleaning filtration systems in one of the residential atriums when his comm unit buzzed with an alert. It was a station-wide announcement, broadcast in Universal Standard. "Attention all Vega Prime personnel and residents. Due to a Level 2 security protocol activation, all non-essential movement throughout the station is temporarily restricted. Please remain in your current locations until further notice. This is a precautionary measure only. Thank you for your cooperation." Jacob frowned. A Level 2 security protocol was serious, not a full emergency, but significant enough to lock down the station. Something had happened. He continued his maintenance work, maintaining his cover while his enhanced hearing picked up the worried conversations of nearby residents. Fragments of speculation floated around him, everything from a terrorist threat to a containment breach in one of the research labs. Then, approximately 20 minutes after the lockdown began, Jacob's comm unit buzzed again, this time with a direct message for maintenance personnel. "All available maintenance staff report to Diplomatic Sector D7 immediately. Environmental emergency." Jacob's pulse quickened. D7, the location of the Security Council meeting and his hidden recording device. This couldn't be a coincidence. He gathered his tools and made his way to Diplomatic Sector D7, showing his maintenance credentials to the increased security personnel along the way. When he arrived, he found the area in controlled chaos. Security officers were escorting diplomatic personnel from the conference room, while medical teams attended to several figures who appeared to be experiencing respiratory distress. Jacob approached a fellow maintenance worker who was already on scene. What happened? Some kind of airborne irritant in the ventilation system, the worker explained, looking harried. Hit right in the middle of the big closed session. Half the Security Council is coughing up their lungs. Jacob surveyed the scene, spotting Ambassador Vex among those being treated by medical staff. Her normally purple skin had taken on a concerning grayish tinge. Nearby, High Chancellor Oren was engaged in an intense conversation with security officials, his normally composed demeanor showing signs of strain. They're saying it was deliberate, the maintenance worker continued in a lower voice. Sabotage. Jacob nodded grimly. What do they need us to do? Full diagnostic of the environmental systems. They want to know how someone could have introduced a contaminant without triggering the safety protocols. As Jacob joined the maintenance team investigating the ventilation systems, his mind was working on multiple levels. This attack, and it was clearly an attack, had occurred in the same room where he had placed his recording device just hours earlier. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Either someone else had been planning something similar, or his activities had been discovered, and this was an elaborate countermeasure. He needed to get to his recording device, both to secure the information it might have captured and to ensure it wasn't discovered during the investigation. But with security swarming the area, that would be nearly impossible right now. Jacob focused on his assigned task, methodically checking ventilation components while keeping an eye out for an opportunity to retrieve his device. As he worked, he overheard fragments of conversation between security personnel, traces of Nivalian pollen, non-lethal but highly irritating to most oxygen-breathing species. Security protocols all read normal during the incident, no alarms. Had to be someone with intimate knowledge of the station's systems. The last comment made Jacob pause momentarily. As a maintenance worker, he certainly fit that description. If security started investigating station staff with system access, his cover could be at risk. His concern deepened when he spotted Regelian Security Chief Kraz entering the area, accompanied by two security officers leading a restrained figure between them, the Bellatraxian maintenance worker who had been with Jacob earlier when they fixed the environmental systems. Chief Kraz was known for his thoroughness and suspicious nature, traits that made him excellent at his job, but potentially problematic for someone like Jacob. If the Bellatraxian was being detained for questioning, it wouldn't be long before security came for him as well. Jacob needed to accelerate his timeline. Earth had to be warned about whatever was happening in Tau Ceti, and now also about this apparent attempt to disrupt the Galactic Security Council. He continued his diagnostic work, gradually making his way toward the ceiling access where his recording device was hidden. Carter, a voice called from behind him. Jacob turned to see Rodriguez approaching, looking tense. They want all maintenance personnel who had access to this sector in the last 24 hours for questioning, Rodriguez said quietly. That includes us. Security checkpoint at the main entrance to the sector. Jacob nodded. Thanks for the heads up. I'll finish this diagnostic run first. Might help clear our names if we can find the actual point of entry for the contaminant. Rodriguez looked nervously toward the security checkpoint where several staff members were already being processed. Don't take too long. They're not in a patient mood. As Rodriguez left, Jacob continued working his way toward the ceiling access. He finally reached it and, after making sure no one was watching too closely, climbed up into the maintenance space. The recording device was still there, untouched. Jacob quickly retrieved it, replacing it with a dummy device that would appear to be a standard part of the environmental control system, if discovered. He then completed a legitimate diagnostic of the ventilation system in the area before descending back to the main level. With the recording device securely hidden in a compartment in his tool belt, Jacob made his way to the security checkpoint. Several Regelian officers were processing station personnel, scanning them with handheld devices and asking pointed questions about their movements over the past day. When Jacob's turn came, he presented his maintenance credentials and submitted to the scan, maintaining a calm, slightly confused demeanor. State your activities in Diplomatic Sector D7 over the past 24 hours, the Regellian officer demanded. I was called in early this morning, about 0600, for an environmental systems malfunction, Jacob explained truthfully. Temperature regulators were malfunctioning. I worked with maintenance technician Rodriguez and technician Zexvar to repair the issue. The Regellian's compound eye studied him intently. And did you observe anything unusual during this repair work? Jacob appeared to consider the question. Well, the regulator failure was odd. It looked like component degradation, but the part was relatively new according to the maintenance logs. Could have been a manufacturing defect, I suppose. A partial truth was always more convincing than a complete fabrication. Jacob had indeed found something unusual, the sabotage device, but he carefully omitted that detail. The Regellian made a note in his datapad. Did you access any other systems in this sector during your repair work? Just the environmental controls, Jacob replied. Oh, and I had to reset one of the lighting panels that got disrupted when we cycled the power to the main regulator. Another security officer approached and conferred briefly with the one questioning Jacob, their mandibles clicking in their native language too rapidly for Jacob's translator to process. The first officer turned back to Jacob. Remain on station and available for further questioning. You are restricted from accessing Diplomatic Sector D7 until this investigation is concluded. Jacob nodded. Understood. Should I continue my regular maintenance duties in other sectors? Yes. Report any suspicious activities immediately. Released from the checkpoint, Jacob made his way back to the maintenance staff areas. He needed to find a secure location to review the contents of his recording device, preferably before his next scheduled check-in with Earth. The maintenance break room was nearly empty, with most staff either being questioned by security or dealing with the aftermath of the incident. Jacob took advantage of the momentary privacy to access a maintenance terminal, ostensibly to update his work logs. While appearing to input routine maintenance data, he carefully connected his recording device to the terminal using an adapter disguised as a standard diagnostic tool. The device was designed to appear as a normal system diagnostic in the station's logs, while actually downloading the recorded audio from the Security Council meeting. The download had just completed when the door to the break room slid open and Lyra Vex entered. She looked surprised to see him there, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to what Jacob recognized as the Centaurian equivalent of a startled expression. You, she said, recognizing him from their previous encounters. Jacob stood and gave a respectful nod. Ma'am, can I help you with something? Lyra glanced around the empty break room, then back at Jacob. I'm looking for Chief Engineer Tlar. I was told she might be here. I haven't seen her, Jacob replied truthfully. Most of the engineering staff are dealing with the situation in Diplomatic Sector D7. Lyra's patterns shifted again, this time to something Jacob couldn't quite interpret. Yes, the incident. Were you there? I'm part of the maintenance team investigating the environmental systems, Jacob said carefully. Do you know if your mother is all right? I saw she was among those affected. A flash of genuine concern crossed Lyra's features. The medics say she'll recover fully. The irritant wasn't lethal, just precisely targeted to disrupt the meeting. She studied Jacob with new interest. You noticed my mother specifically? Jacob realized he might have made a small error. A maintenance worker wouldn't necessarily know Ambassador Vex by sight. He covered smoothly. I've worked many diplomatic functions. You learn to recognize the important figures. Lyra seemed to accept this explanation. Yes, I suppose you would. She moved closer, her voice dropping. What do you think happened? Really? The question was unexpected. Why would a Centaurian Royal Guard member, the daughter of a high-ranking ambassador, seek the opinion of a human maintenance worker? Jacob's instincts told him this was some kind of test. I'm just a maintenance tech, ma'am, he replied modestly. But the timing seems convenient. Disrupting a closed Security Council session on the same day, they were discussing something important enough to implement unusual security measures. Lyra's bioluminescent patterns pulsed in what seemed like approval. You're observant. For a human. Before Jacob could respond, his comm unit buzzed with a new station-wide alert. Attention, all Vega Prime personnel. Security Protocol Level 2 has been downgraded to Level 3. Restricted movement protocols remain in effect for Diplomatic Sector D7 only. All other station activities may resume as normal. Thank you for your cooperation. Lyra's attention shifted to the announcement, and Jacob took the opportunity to disconnect his recording device from the terminal and secure it in his tool belt. I should get back to my duties, he said, standing. If I see Chief Engineer Tlar, I'll let her know you're looking for her. Lyra nodded, still seeming distracted by her own thoughts. As Jacob moved toward the door, she spoke again. Human, what is your designation? Carter, ma'am. Jacob Carter. Maintenance level 3. Carter, she repeated, as if committing it to memory. You seem different from the other humans I've encountered on this station. Jacob gave what he hoped was an appropriately self-deprecating smile. Just doing my job, ma'am. As he left the break room, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter had been significant somehow. Lyra had been dismissive of him yesterday, yet today she had sought his opinion on the security incident. Something had changed in her perception, and Jacob wasn't sure if that was a good thing for his cover. He made his way to a secluded maintenance junction where he knew there were no surveillance devices, one of several blind spots he had identified during his time on the station. There, he used a secure handheld device to review the contents of the recording. The audio quality was excellent, capturing the proceedings of the Security Council meeting from its formal opening until the moment the environmental attack had occurred. Jacob listened intently as High Chancellor Oren called the session to order and outlined the agenda. Esteemed members of the Security Council, we are convened today to address the escalating situation in the Tau Ceti system and its potential implications for galactic security. As you have all been briefed, the anomaly first detected 3 standard months ago has grown exponentially, consuming not only matter but seemingly space-time itself. There was a brief murmur among the council members before the Chancellor continued. Our scientific division has completed their analysis of the phenomenon, and I must report that their conclusions are troubling. The anomaly bears all the characteristics described in the ancient Founder archives regarding the Void Heralds, entities that exist beyond normal space-time and feed on the fabric of reality itself. This revelation caused more pronounced reactions from the council members. A voice Jacob recognized as belonging to the Arcturian representative spoke up. Chancellor, the Void Heralds are considered mythological by most modern scientific authorities. Are we certain this is not simply a natural phenomenon, perhaps a previously undocumented form of space-time distortion? The evidence is compelling, a new voice responded, likely the head of the scientific division. The energy signature, the consumption patterns, the temporal disruptions around the anomaly's perimeter all match the descriptions in not just the Founder archives, but correlating accounts from 17 different ancient civilizations across the galaxy. Ambassador Vex's voice entered the discussion. If we accept that these are indeed the Void Heralds of ancient texts, then we must also accept the warnings about their nature. They do not merely consume, they corrupt. Any living intelligence that encounters them directly risks becoming their agent, what the archives call the Hallowed. Which brings us to our most pressing concern, Chancellor Oren said gravely. The anomaly's position in the Tau Ceti system places it dangerously close to Earth, a world whose people have no knowledge of the Void Heralds and no defenses against their influence. Drexmau, the Orion security minister, spoke next. Then the solution is clear. We establish a quarantine perimeter around both Tau Ceti and the Sol system. No ships in or out. If the humans become corrupted, we contain the threat. Ambassador Vex's response was immediate and forceful. That would condemn an entire sentient species to possible extinction without even giving them a chance to defend themselves. The non-interference protocols were established to protect developing civilizations, not to abandon them to cosmic threats beyond their comprehension. The ambassador's emotional attachment to the humans is well known, Drex countered dismissively. But sentiment cannot dictate our security policies. The Void Heralds represent an existential threat to the entire galaxy if the ancient accounts are accurate. We cannot risk wider contamination for the sake of one pre-Union species. The debate continued, with various council members weighing in on both sides. Jacob listened intently, his concern growing with each exchange. If this threat was as serious as they believed, Earth needed to know immediately, not just about the danger itself, but about the political debate that might determine whether they received any warning or assistance. Then, approximately 43 minutes into the recording, there was a sudden commotion. Voices cried out in alarm, followed by sounds of coughing and respiratory distress. The attack had begun. Security protocol. Chancellor Oren managed to call out between coughs. Secure the... His voice was cut off by more coughing, and the recording captured the sounds of confusion as the council chamber was evacuated. Just before the recording ended, Jacob heard something that made his blood run cold. A voice, speaking in a language that his translator couldn't process, but that seemed somehow familiar. The voice was barely audible above the chaos, but its tone was not distressed or panicked like the others. It sounded satisfied. Jacob checked the time. His next scheduled contact with Earth was in just over an hour, and he needed to compile all of this information. The Tau Ceti anomaly, the Void Heralds, the Security Council debate, the sabotage of the meeting, and now this mysterious voice, into his report. He was about to head back to his quarters to prepare the transmission when his comm unit buzzed once more. This time it was a direct message, not a station-wide announcement. Maintenance Technician Carter, report to Ambassador Residence C. 12 immediately for priority environmental systems check. Authorization, Diplomatic Core Alpha. Jacob frowned. Ambassador Residence C. 12 belonged to Ambassador Vex. After being exposed to the airborne irritant, she should be in the medical center, not her residence. And why request him specifically? It could be a trap, but it could also be an opportunity to gather more information. After a moment's consideration, Jacob decided to respond to the summons. If it was a trap, his cover identity as a simple maintenance worker should provide some protection. After all, who would suspect a janitor of espionage? He made his way to the diplomatic residential sector, passing through several security checkpoints along the way. At each one, his credentials were scanned and the maintenance request verified. Whatever this was, it appeared to be officially logged in the station's systems. When he arrived at Ambassador Vex's residence, he was surprised to find the door opened by Lyra rather than a diplomatic aide or security officer. "Come in quickly," she said, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with what Jacob interpreted as anxiety. Jacob entered cautiously, maintenance toolkit in hand. "I received a request for an environmental systems check." "A pretense," Lyra said, closing the door behind him. "My mother wishes to speak with you privately." Before Jacob could respond, Lyra led him through the luxurious ambassadorial quarters to a sitting room where Ambassador Vex reclined on a contoured rest platform designed for Centaurian physiology. Her color had improved somewhat from when Jacob had seen her earlier, but she still appeared weakened by her exposure to the irritant. "Thank you for coming, Maintenance Technician Carter," Ambassador Vex said, her voice slightly raspy. "Or should I address you by your actual rank, Commander?" Jacob kept his expression neutral, though internally he was rapidly recalculating his options. His cover was clearly compromised, at least with the Vexes. The question was how much they knew and what they intended to do with that knowledge. "I'm not sure I understand, Ambassador," he replied cautiously. "I'm just a maintenance worker." Ambassador Vex made a sound that translated across species as gentle amusement. "Please, Commander, let us dispense with pretenses. I have known of your true purpose on this station for nearly a year." Jacob remained silent, neither confirming nor denying her assertion. "Your caution is commendable," the ambassador continued. "It is, in fact, one of the qualities that has impressed me about Earth's covert operations. You accomplish much with limited resources, through careful observation and patience." She gestured to a seat near her rest platform. "Please sit. What I have to discuss with you concerns the survival of both our peoples." Jacob decided to take a calculated risk. If Ambassador Vex had wanted to expose him, she could have done so already. He sat in the offered chair. "How did you know?" "I have been a diplomat for over 7 decades, she replied. "I've learned to recognize the difference between someone who is present to observe and someone who is merely present. Your attentiveness, your positioning during key diplomatic events, the way you remember details. These are not typical traits of maintenance personnel." "And yet you didn't report me," Jacob noted. "Because Earth has a right to protect its interests, Ambassador Vex said simply. All member species of the Galactic Union maintain intelligence networks. Why should Earth be different, merely because they are newer to the cosmic community? Lyra, who had remained standing near the door, spoke up. I didn't believe her when she told me. Humans are so technologically limited. I couldn't imagine one successfully operating as an intelligence agent on Vega Prime. Yet here we are, Jacob said, turning to face her. Perhaps there's more to humans than you've been led to believe. That is precisely why I've asked you here, Ambassador Vex interjected. The attack on the Security Council today was no accident, Commander Carter. It was orchestrated by those who wished to prevent Earth from receiving warning about the Tau Ceti anomaly. Jacob's mind raced. The Draconis hegemony? Ambassador Vex's bioluminescent patterns shifted in what Jacob recognized as surprise. You know of their involvement? Impressive. Yes, the hegemony has been moving pieces on the board for some time now. They believe the Void Heralds can be controlled, harnessed as weapons. They are wrong, catastrophically so, but their delusion drives their actions. The Security Council was debating whether to warn Earth about the threat, Jacob said, revealing that he knew at least part of what had transpired in the closed session. Yes, and the debate was not going in the hegemony's favor, Ambassador Vex confirmed. Many on the council, myself included, believe Earth deserves the chance to prepare. The hegemony and their allies prefer to use your world as a buffer, a sacrifice to buy time while they attempt to weaponize the anomaly. Jacob considered this information. It aligned with what he had discovered and overheard, but there was still something missing. Why tell me this now? Why expose your knowledge of my identity? Ambassador Vex's expression grew more serious, her bioluminescent patterns dimming slightly. Because time is running out, Commander. The Security Council has been compromised. The attack today was not merely to disrupt the meeting. It was to identify and eliminate those who support warning Earth. I barely survived, and 2 other pro-Earth Council members are in critical condition. The hegemony has agents within the station's security forces, Lyra added. They'll be looking for ways to control or contain the information flow to Earth. Your usual communication channels may already be compromised. Jacob nodded slowly, processing this. So what are you proposing, Ambassador? I am offering you direct access to my personal diplomatic communication channel, a quantum-encrypted link that bypasses the station's regular systems. You can use it to send a complete warning to your government, along with the defensive protocols the Founder Archives prescribe against the Void Heralds. It was an extraordinary offer, and one that would constitute a serious breach of Galactic Union protocols on technology sharing with pre-Union civilizations. Why would you take such a risk for Earth? Ambassador Vex's bioluminescent patterns shifted to a deeper, more resonant pattern that Jacob had never seen before. Because long before I was an ambassador, I was a xenoarchaeologist. I studied the ruins of civilizations consumed by the Void Heralds in previous incursions. The devastation, the corruption of all that was noble and beautiful in those cultures. It cannot happen again. Not to any sentient species, certainly not to one with as much potential as humanity. She leaned forward, her voice strengthening despite her weakened condition. Your species has something rare, Commander, an adaptability, a resilience that most established Union members have engineered out of themselves in their quest for stability and specialization. That quality may prove essential in the coming darkness. Jacob made his decision. What do you need me to do? Lyra will show you to my private communication suite. You'll have 10 minutes. Enough time to transmit everything you've learned and the defensive protocols from the archives. After that, you must return to your duties as if nothing has changed. Your cover remains valuable, both to Earth and to those of us who wish to preserve the alliance that will be necessary in the days ahead. Jacob nodded and stood, but Ambassador Vex raised a hand to stop him. One more thing, Commander. There is a reason I recognized what you are, beyond mere diplomatic experience. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted again, forming a specific configuration that Jacob recognized from his intelligence briefings, a pattern used by the shadowy cross-species organization known as the Sentinel Compact, a group dedicated to protecting the galaxy from existential threats, operating outside official Union channels. We have much to discuss in the days ahead, she said quietly. But for now, save your world. That is our most urgent task. Jacob followed Lyra to a concealed room within the ambassadorial suite, where advanced communication technology unlike anything he had seen on the station awaited. As he prepared to transmit the most important message of his career, he reflected on how drastically the situation had changed in just 24 hours. The young Centaurian princess who had mocked him as a primitive maintenance worker now stood guard at the door, while he used her mother's quantum-encrypted channel to warn Earth about a cosmic horror straight out of humanity's darkest myths. The irony wasn't lost on him. Sometimes, the most effective disguise was the one people were predisposed to overlook, like a simple human janitor. As he completed the transmission and prepared to return to his maintenance duties, Lyra approached him, her earlier contempt replaced by something approaching respect. "My mother says you may help save us all," she said, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with what Jacob now recognized as the Centaurian expression of solemn ceremony. Then, to his astonishment, she lowered herself in the formal Centaurian gesture of deep respect, one typically reserved for revered elders or great leaders. "Forgive my earlier disrespect, Commander Carter," she said formally. "I judge by appearance rather than substance. I will not make that mistake again." And in that moment, as a Centaurian princess bowed before a human operative disguised as a janitor, Jacob Carter understood that the alliance being forged in this crisis would reshape galactic politics forever, assuming any of them survived the coming darkness. Ambassador Vex appeared in the doorway, still weakened but standing proudly. "It is time for him to return to his duties, daughter," she said gently. Then, with formal gravity, she addressed Jacob directly. "Go with honor, Commander. When next we meet openly, it will be as acknowledged allies against the darkness." Jacob nodded respectfully to both Centaurians. "Thank you, Ambassador. Princess." Then he retrieved his maintenance toolkit and slipped back into the role of Jacob Carter, human janitor, a role that had just become one of the most important in the galaxy. As he left the ambassadorial quarters and made his way through the station corridors, Jacob reflected that sometimes the most powerful position wasn't the most visible one. Sometimes, the person everyone overlooked was the one who could change everything. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.